thank you very much to the audience for joining us on yet another great panel for the Eurogulf Information Center. Today we're speaking specifically about Yemen. Let me just briefly introduce myself. I'm Sofia Barbarani. I'm a freelance journalist. I'm currently based in Tunis, and our speakers are from all over the world, so I will introduce them to you in just a second. Let me start with just giving you a very brief overview of the situation. As I'm sure most of you know, for years now, Yemen's security and stability has been challenged by both internal and, of course, external factors. After a devastating cholera outbreak, famine, and more recently floods, Yemen is now set to face another challenge, another crisis, which is the COVID-19 pandemic. Last month, Yemen reported its first 2 deaths, and it's been followed, unfortunately, by more cases and more deaths. The health system has been decimated by years of war and starvation, putting an already vulnerable population at even greater risk. So what are we going to touch on today? What are our speakers going to focus on today? As mentioned, COVID-19, so the further strain on the local economy and on the foreign aid. We're also going to look at international power struggles, regional players' involvement, and the peace initiatives, the ongoing peace initiatives within Yemen. So let me very quickly introduce to our guests, our viewers, our 4 wonderful speakers from all over the world. So starting with Washington, D.C., we have Fatima Abu al-Asrar. She's a non-resident scholar at the Middle East Institute, specializing in Yemen and the Gulf, with a focus on Shia transnational networks and conflict dynamics. We also have from Amman, Jordan, Nadwa al-Dawsari. She's a Yemeni researcher, conflict practitioner, policy analyst, and a specialist on Yemeni tribes. She's also the founder of Partners Yemen. From Milan in Italy, Laura Silvia Battaglia Al-Jalal. She's a freelance journalist and documentary filmmaker with focus on Middle East and particularly on Yemen. And finally, from Stockholm, Sweden, Bushra Nasser Kretschmer. She's an economic development expert and the founder of Sabah Consulting Services. Thank you very much for joining us today. I will let you ladies take it from here, but before I do, just let me very quickly say to our viewers that after our speakers talk to us, we're going to open the floor to the audience and go through Q&As at the end of the session. Please send your questions meanwhile to the Q&A tab that you'll see at the bottom of the Zoom screen, not on the chat window, because that just gets a little bit confusing. So I'll let you take it from here. Fatima, if you'd like to start off.
Thank you so much, Sophia. Appreciate it. And thanks to EJIC for inviting us to speak on Yemen. Thanks to the viewers for your interest. I'd like to perhaps start by giving an overview of the pitfalls for the peace process at the current time. Much of what's happening in Yemen today in terms of handling the conflict in Yemen is starting to mirror what has happened post 2011, which is after the Arab uprising. In dealing with Yemen, I think that we're somewhat resorting to over-idealistic scenarios that are somewhat disconnected from the ground. Shortly after the Yemen uprising in 2011, when Yemeni President Ali Abdullah Saleh, who governed the country for almost 27 years, an agreement sponsored by the international community and the Arab Gulf nations have taken place, and through that agreement, there was power was handed over to in a single candidate elections to President Abdurrahman Mansour Hadi, who was then the vice president for the country. And there was some type of a consensus around this. All movements, all political parties participated in what was dubbed then one of the most successful initiatives for Yemen, which was the National Dialogue process or conference. The National Dialogue had been unique because it had included actors that wouldn't have otherwise been around the table normally. So you saw an interesting mix of activists, civil society members, political party heads, former ministers, current ministers. It was truly one of the most perhaps participatory exercises that the nation had experienced. And it had given hope through that process. A new idealistic, great Yemeni constitution was drafted. But the entire reason for this national dialogue exercise was to basically pave the conflict, pave the situation in Yemen towards stability and avoid conflict. At that time, the focus was, let's avoid civil war. But what happened had exactly led to civil war. And the same pitfalls that have, I sort of want to just discuss some of the lessons that we have learned from the national dialogue and how it is mirroring itself today as we see the UN handling of the peace process with the UN Envoy's office and how they're going about the current process, which is, for me, is a little bit concerning. Part of the problem why the national dialogue had failed, in my opinion, is because of the drive was largely from the international community that wanted to see how this process is going. Inclusiveness was somewhat a tick in a box rather than a genuine exercise. Spoilers were avoided rather than dealt with. There was certainly a disconnect between the environment on the ground, between the political process and what people felt on the ground. And then there were economic issues. There were bread and butter issues. There were electricity issues, service delivery that had made it difficult for people to buy into a political process that seemed to happen on another planet, right? It was happening in the Movenpick Hotel in Sana'a, but to see delegates and people coming in and out of that conference having, even things like security that the majority of people were not having. Terrorist attacks had been escalating at that time. People were having food at the conference. Elsewhere in Yemen, people were starving. And that level of disconnect was one of the reasons why that National Dialogue Conference, despite all of its good intention, has paved the way for civil war. And I think that the current peace process, the way that we are thinking about it jointly from Yemeni actors to the international community is as diluted as the National Dialogue Conference. One of the problems that I see today is the issue. For example, if we go to the Stockholm Agreement, which was brokered in 2018, December 2018, that was perhaps the first attempt from the UN Envoy, Martin Griffiths. And I would say first, we've had several UN envoys before Mr. Griffiths. So there were two envoys who were not able to get us where we needed to be. And Mr. Martin Griffiths had assumed his responsibilities in 2018. By the end of 2018, he had this vision of kickstarting the peace talks with confidence building measures. These confidence building measures again, we're highly idealistic. There was a ceasefire agreement on the port of Hodeidah. There was a agreement to exchange prisoners. And the third component, Hodeidah prisoners, I should know this. Taz, how could I forget this? Taz, yes, it has been forgotten from our minds. We've allegedly, we've approached this really cautiously, saying we're going to see where this goes, because all of these things are fundamental things that we all agree on. But what happened is that there was an overwhelming focus on the issue of a ceasefire in Hodeidah, that everything around it seemed to just dissipate and just disappear. And even with the ceasefire in Hodeidah, the question that we need to ask is, are people feeling really more safe and secure today than before the Stockholm Agreement? And the answer is no. Just 2 days ago, or 3 days ago perhaps, there was an attack on the Red Sea mills of the Red Sea coast. We are still hearing of low-level conflict where small villages are being affected, but we're not hearing about it in international headlines. It's not even making the news. So it's constantly frustrating when people say, that a part of the agreement has been successful. We've managed to secure Hodeidah from the fighting. You actually have not. The people are not feeling safe and secure. People are still suffering from low-level conflict, and we need to start measuring the role of all actors in the conflict. Often there's a focus on the coalition role, and rightly so. You have to, the coalition is supplied by funding from the international community, military assistance from the international community, and we have a responsibility to know that this is not going towards citizens. I'm sorry. I apologize. So the issue here is that we have to realize that also the Houthis are being held accountable. These are another party to the conflict. And just because we're not funding them with weapons, it doesn't mean that we absolve them from the responsibility. The second thing is the issue of inclusiveness. It seems that we haven't figured out yet what that exactly means in the case of Yemen. Currently, we see the UN envoy focused on making the talks just between the warring parties. And this is sending a really dangerous message that we'll only talk to you when you're a violent power. And we're sort of, not seeing a full participatory process. I understand that he wants to talk to the major heads, but the process needs to be more inclusive of political parties, of other political movements that are on the scene. The other issue is that the constant, again, there's a disconnect between what's happening on the ground and what's happening in the peace talks. And I think this is one of the reasons why we continue having problems in the peace process. The economic situation is not going to be fixed overnight, but going towards delivering something, acknowledging the conflict that stems from the economic complexity is one of the things that the UN envoy has to focus on as well. Otherwise, he's just talking about, about grand ideas that have no room for implementation. So, if certain things need to be acknowledged, the fact that, certain warring parties are committing violations, that's something that needs to be tracked, monitored, and stopped. There needs to be the same push that had happened to stop a war in Hudaydah needs to happen with the issue of stopping the Houthis from advancing. Since the Stockholm Agreement, things have actually gotten worse for Yemenis. The territory that was controlled by the government is receding. Places that were supposed to be safe havens. I mean, think about in the north, just 100 kilometers of the Saudi border, Al-Jove, Nehem, all of these places did not experience conflict for the past 4 years. Now they're steeped in conflict. People need to understand this. Just less than 2 months ago, people were living in their homes, and now we have over 100,000 people displaced during this coronavirus crisis. And you know, if you follow up the news, you might think that things in Yemen are fine, because there is no sense of urgency to return these people back home. And this is really one of the things that just make people feel that whatever is happening on the international level is not representing them. There's this idea that the UN Envoy is only representing the interests of the international humanitarian agencies and not that of Yemenis. He needs to remember that Yemenis are ultimately his clients. One of the things that I saw in the national dialogue, and I'm going to wrap it up here. One of the things that I saw in the national dialogue is that there were jokes, there were you know, just the newspapers were talking almost on a daily basis, criticizing the national dialogue and saying where the problems with it were, while the international community and everybody in the conference was just marching forward without seeing anything else. You know, they were just like a horse, and they had their blinders on and could not see anything outside of that. So there was no perspective in that entire process. And this is exactly what's happening now. When we voice criticism to the UN envoy, it's not to attack him, but to actually say, please try to, you know, find ways to actually make this process more genuine. And what is the result? Our voices just end up being minimized and reduced and just unheard of. Like, you know, I've actually heard it in the UN Security Council where one member said, you know, just expressed disappointment that the UN envoy does not have sufficient support. This is, no, please, not from activists, not from Yemenis, not from people who are actually feeling, you know, the brunt of this war. So the one thing that I just wanted to emphasize as I wrap up is that, yes, there's a way to actually make this process more inclusive, more genuine. You know, think about the problems that Yemeni people are having. Think about the not just the COVID-19, but also what lies beyond that. There were the floods. What is the international community doing about the floods that have happened in Marib and in Aden, and it's devastating? What are the aftermaths of this flood? Trash, bugs. Yemenis are not just suffering from COVID-19. There is schizomyelitis, there is dengue fever, there's cholera, and the health infrastructure cannot deal with all of these things. Do you know what else Yemenis are suffering from? Electricity, power cuts. You know, just things like this are some of the things that create conflict and challenges the legitimacy of the actors and all actors, including the international community, at a time where the Yemeni government is extremely weak and its hands are tied. I feel that we have to really start thinking more inclusively, broadly, and really bring the Yemeni voices in and listen and learn from previous experiences. Thanks for listening.
Fatima, thank you very much. We are going to go on to our next speaker now. Nedwa, if you'd like to take it from here, giving us perhaps, as we talked about before, an overview of the conflict as of right now.
Yes, thank you for having me today. And it's great to talk after Fatima because she did put a lot of things into perspective. So what I want to talk about is where does this conflict stand? Because it does have implications for Yemeni's ability to fight COVID-19. And I can say in one sentence that fighting COVID-19 is not the priority of any of the armed actors in Yemen or their backers, regional backers. So, I mean, it's been, just to give it a general context, it's been over 5 years since the Saudis-led coalitions launched its military offensive in Yemen. The Saudis had a clear objective to defeat the Houthis and reinstate Hadi's government in power. 5 years later, Houthis are not defeated, they're actually stronger. And anti-Houthi forces are fractured and fighting each other. Politically, as Fatima said, the peace process is stumbling. 3 rounds of UN-led negotiations have failed, and I honestly think that the Stockholm Agreement has failed. It actually didn't make much progress, and it reinforced the military stalemate and by default political stalemate. And what the Stockholm Agreement did, in addition to all the the spot-on things that Fatima said, is also it gave room to the Houthis to regroup and launch offensive in other places. So that's why they managed to make major advances in Jove and Nehem, and towards threaten Marib, and they continue to threaten Marib. So Saudis also have their own side negotiations with the Houthis, and we don't know much about these because there is no much transparency about what's what is going on in these negotiations. And militarily, it seems that the conflict is getting even more intense internally. The Houthis have made major gains by taking Al-Jove, east of Sana'a, north of Marib last March, which is, and by doing that, they put Marib, which is the last government stronghold, at a great risk. If the Houthis take over Marib, then you're faced with a situation, as Fatima said, with millions of people displaced and in the midst of COVID-19 outbreak. Since the beginning of the war, the Houthis escalated offensive, since the beginning of this year, not the war, sorry. The Houthis have escalated offensive in several front lines in Marib, Nehem, Jove, Hodeidah in the west coast, as well as Bala and Aden in the south. The government forces has so far managed to halt the Houthis' attempt to take Marib, but they're also largely on the defensive, which is not a good thing, a good place to be. Alarmingly also, conflict is escalating in the south between the SDC forces that are backed by the UAE and government forces that are backed by the Saudis. We've seen escalation particularly since last August in Aden, more recently in Socotra, and now currently in Aden. So how did we get here? How did this, military intervention, which was expected to, reverse the situation in Yemen in a matter of weeks, keeps dragging on until today? So how did we get here? I think several factors. The Saudi-led coalition entered Yemen war with a clear military objective, which is to defeat the Houthis, but no strategy or exit plans. I've heard interviews with Saudi military strategists and officials saying this was going to take 48 hours or something like that, which it didn't. Also, the Saudi and Emiratis have their serious differences in Yemen. In fact, they have divergent agendas. The Emiratis are strongly backing the SDC to split the south. They have supported SDC-allied armed groups also, who have fought with the government since early 2017. Saudis don't want secession of Yemen, of South Yemen, but they're also extremely incompetent militarily and politically to bring the results they want. There's also a conflict between the Emiratis and President Hadi government. There's a great animosity between the two. UAE actions have undermined Hadi's government presence on the ground in the south by propping other armed actors that have competed and fought with the Yemen government. UAE fears that the government, Hadi's government, is heavily influenced by the Islah Party, which is the Muslim Brotherhood affiliated party in Yemen, which UAE considers a regional threat. So you see the coalition agenda, it kind of shifted from defeating the Houthis or weakening the Houthis to, for the UAE, exterminating Islah, secession of South Yemen. Saudis kind of trying to contain the situation on a constant basis, much more like reactionary, in a reactionary way. I think a big part of the problem is the lack of leadership on the Yemeni side. The Yemeni government is extremely incompetent and it's living abroad. For 6 years now, Hadi is not a unifying figure. He's failed to bring the different actors and kind of different actors who are, anti-Houthi forces, to kind of bring them to an agreement. And he's literally fighting his own war for power. Also, there's a lack of leadership on the Saudi side. And I think that's what left the vacuum, that caused all these fightings on the ground. Saudis are not strategic. They're not leading their war in Yemen. They have the leverage to launch military offensive to weaken the Houthis in the north and bring Yemeni government, SEC, and forces in the West Coast to an agreement, but they're not using this leverage. Just last month, the government forces and the tribes launched major counteroffensive to push the Houthis out of Marib and Baida and Jove, and they were making progress. Houthis forces were literally collapsing, only for the Saudis to announce a ceasefire abruptly, and kind of undermine that potential gain that would have helped at least secure some areas from Houthis' offensive. Now Houthis have been pushing into Marib, have been sending reinforcement for the past at least 6 weeks, right after the ceasefire was announced, and they're aiming at taking over Marib. That's their goal. That's their #1 goal right now. Again, Saudis have been reactionary in a largely reactionary, dealing with things when they fall apart, rather than trying to be more strategic. They're acting as mediators between the different local forces when they should be actually leading. They need to have a vision. They can't continue to resolve things one piece at a time. They need to have a vision. They need to bring the actors, and they need to determine how they want to deal with Yemen, rather than just reacting to things when they fall apart. So all of this situation have largely played into the hands of the Houthis, and I'm a firm believer. We want peace. Yemenis want peace, but I'm a firm believer that unless Houthis are weakened militarily, it's really hard for peace to happen. It doesn't matter if people talk for the next 100 years. It doesn't matter if we have I don't know how many peace agreements. It's not going to work if Houthis are not weakened militarily, because Houthis are ambitious. They're not going to give up their military ambition to control all of Yemen unless they're weakened militarily enough to accept to coexist with other actors. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll be happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadwa. And on to our next speaker from Italy, Laura, if you'd like to take it from here.
Yes, thank you, Sophia. Thank you, everybody, for having me, and I'm very grateful of being a part of this amazing panel. And yeah, starting from what Fatima and also Najwa said, it's true that COVID-19 is not something on the top of the agenda, all the political groups, but at the same time, it's not in the top priority of the worries of Yemenis. Fatima said about the floods. We talk about people displaced in areas where before war wasn't there, like Jove or Marib. So it's just one thing among the others. But what the pandemic that now we know is in Yemen is bringing is the fact that it's an opportunity for everyone to further their political agenda, each side other of mismanagement. From a political point of view, where it's possible, we are seeing the local actors are taking advantage of the moment. In the south of Yemen, as was mentioned before, the separatist movement STC has declared that it wants to govern independently of the central government of the legitimate president Mansour Hadi. On the other side, we are seeing that the Houthis are profiting from the COVID-19, or maybe the fear of the COVID-19, to attack some areas in Jove and Marib. So they are pushing more on their agenda, their military agenda. One of the things that maybe we can say related to the pandemic and also the local actors and the militias, because militias are playing a big role, maybe biggest than the government or other actors, is the fact that the groups controlling different areas of Yemen are not prepared for the arrival of the pandemic. This seems to be a fact. First, because for them, the COVID-19, the virus, is not yet a full reality, maybe just in the last week, but before it wasn't. And we saw among social media or also among the people that the feeling about the COVID was they will never touch us, they will never come to Yemen. Yes, of course, Yemen is suffering from a total isolation because it's not possible to enter into Yemen, it's not possible to get out of Yemen. So the course of Yemen, this 5 years of war, for the moment, for the spreading the pandemic, was until now, it's lucky, but it's not enough to say that a virus can't spread in a country like happened in other countries. So first of all, there was like an underestimation of it. And this is not surprising, I can say, considering the many countries around the world, including Italy, United Kingdom, starting with China, had done the same. In Yemen, as we said before, many people died of cholera, others of dengue fever. And so after all, this virus for now is just one more disease among many. We will not be able to know, for example, in some, I talked with some people from other mouth where the dengue fever spread a lot. It's not possible to understand if somebody has a fever because of dengue fever or because he has not COVID-19, and this is the situation in Yemen, in many governorates. On the other hand, we can say that the propaganda is the virus and was sent by Allah against the West and other enemies of Islam like China. This is what we heard from the central communication of Al-Qaeda, even though Al-Qaeda in Yemen didn't talk very much about the virus. We can say didn't talk at all at the moment, but also from the propaganda of the north, of the Houthis. So according to this narrative, until now, the virus was, we can say was, not is, but was an invisible soldier, would punish infidel societies, which are based on capitalism, on globalization, and whose governments have wasted money on fighting wars on Islam instead of investing in healthcare. So there is this imagery of humanity trapped in the dark, which is something that we see from a narrative which is apocalyptic and typically apocalyptic in this situation. But we can say also on the other hand that Al-Qaeda inside Yemen has not yet issued any quarantine instructions, for example. And so until now, AQAP Yemen haven't mentioned the virus. And maybe the reason simply is that AQAP does not give any importance to it at the moment. We said before, it's not a priority for Yemen. And maybe once people start dying in numbers, we will see in the next weeks, maybe AQAP attitude is likely to change to one of exploitation of the virus for popular support. And it will likely say, if you were in charge or ruling by Islamic law, this would never have happened. Another point that I want to underline is that we're seeing also on a law enforcement in some areas where the militias have the control, which is what we are seeing in the north of Yemen. At the beginning of the pandemic, we can say, when there were rumors about the possible spreading of the virus, and the government on the north started to push into opening new textile factories, producing masks, and so starting to prepare, because what happened in Iran before. So we saw much more pressure on the freedom of the press, which is of course something impossible in areas where militias are ruling. There was more strict than before. One episode could be mentioned is the fact that 5 journalists, Yemeni journalists, were under custody since 5 years with accusations of terrorism against the state, were sentenced to death after 5 years, so being captured by Houthis. And the lawyer of the 5 couldn't reach them in the court, couldn't appeal to the court to mitigate the sentence. And this happened even though the international organizations that tried to push the Houthis to think about a possible appeal of the sentence. Is something that is not surprising. For example, if we consider also, just to mention that yesterday a man was killed in Michigan, so we're talking about US. He was sentenced to death, and he was killed because of the accusations they made to him, even though there were a possible solution to rethink about the accusations and freeze the death penalty. So it happens in US. We should not be surprised. It's happening also in Yemen, the north of Yemen. But the connection between the spread of the pandemic and the law enforcement and the control and the censorship on the press is something that we are seeing very, very much in the north of Yemen. Another episode that should be mentioned is the fact that at the beginning of the spreading of the virus, there was the task force. Houthis, they call a task force to understand how to deal with the pandemic. And the head of the group of the journalists there started to tweet about that a woman coming from Saudi Arabia arrived with the virus, so she was positive. And then he canceled the tweet, and they said that this was a fake. But from other sources, we know that he was pushed to stop the spreading of the news. Why? Of course, because militias, they need to go further with their agenda, and they can't not profiting of the moment, which is a good moment for them to conquer many states, like advancing in Al-Jove or advancing in Marib. So, and now the population is dealing with it, and is dealing with the fact that the virus is spreading. A lot of people are starting to be sick. There are not so many indications how to deal with it. And there's a lot of fear among the hospitals and among the people working in hospitals, because as we know, in 5 years, Yemen suffered so much because there are no medical supplies, because doctors and nurses are working in a very difficult environment, and COVID-19 only could make happen this worse.
Laura, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Appreciate that. We are in good time. Yes, we still have some quite a while left. So here is our last speaker, Bushra, if you'd like to take it from here.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sophia. Thank you very much for AJIC for giving me this opportunity. Thank you very much for this lovely female panelist and group. This is the first time having a woman talking about Yemen, and while Yemen is lacking a woman being representative in the political process and in all processes actually. I will be echoing here about the economic context that nobody is speaking about in Yemen. Unfortunately, Yemen is unlike the developing and fragile countries and even the countries in conflict. Yemen is facing and faced the worst, 3 deadly hits at once, where the country faced the flood and the conflict, and now it's COVID-19 is worsening the situation further. The flood in 3 cities due to the climate change that caused many houses being damaged and brought more diseases and epidemic, especially in Aden. The COVID-19 pandemic that is wiping the country without mercy, and the humanitarian crisis, that's the conflict that caused the worst humanitarian crisis in the world in the modern history. I want to focus more on the effect on the economic context. We know all the statistics that we have been hearing and reading about Yemen in terms of humanitarian need, etc. But the conflict caused dysfunctional and fragmented state institutions in north and the south, and significantly damaged the public infrastructure and disrupted the basic services, leaving extremely poor health infrastructure to combat COVID-19, with less than 15% of its functionality, lacking medical supplies, equipment, and qualified health professionals. There is an estimation of 200 ventilators at the moment functioning in the country, and 300 is coming on the way, where in case there's electricity, that might be functioning. All led the increase of deaths during this conflict, and it will increase, and it is, the country is in risk, and the people are in risk to combat COVID-19. Along with these disasters, lack of security led to severe drop in oil exportations, and it even have been reached to halt in the last 2 months, which limited the government revenue and supply for foreign currency, reduced its ability for essential food and medicine imports, while continuing the devaluation of the Yemeni riyal led to sharp increase in the prices of the food prices, as 90% of the Yemen food and the commodities are imported in the country. This also created hinders for the government to pay the public sector, and salaries led to further collapse in the public purchase power and being able to take care of themselves during this COVID-19 pandemic. Vulnerable groups are the most affected people. This catastrophic humanitarian crisis left many Yemenis dependent on humanitarian assistance, which in conclusion supported mainly the prolonging of the war, as happened in Somalia since 1991, with $55 billion has been pumped into the country where more armed groups and prolonged war. Saying that 5 years since the international organizations put together, there was a silence by the international community on the enormous amount of the corruption and obstacles exposed recently during around the massive program in Yemen for the humanitarian aid that was totaling about $8 billion since 2015, questions its efficiency, its purpose and outcome, and questions the purpose of Stockholm Agreement. Furthermore, the funds were circulating outside the formal financial sector and the central bank supervision, which caused huge currency speculations by the Houthis, and it caused deterioration in the banking sector functionality and weakened the central bank governance and supervision. The aid ended up mainly in the pocket of the Houthis rebels, as declared lately and described by the panel of experts report. We had a paralyzed humanitarian system. Houthis led Yemen to starvations and used it and exploited it. This is it. This says it. What kept Yemenis and stayed alive largely because of our strong social cohesion as Yemenis. Yemenis received remittances with an average of $3.4 billion a year, which is triple the amount of the largest pledged last year in 2019, while informal remittances are not included in this figure. Remittances are usually directed to main life needs and extends to income-generating family businesses, and that's what made Yemenis resilient. Remittances were efficient and had development nexuses that the international community needs to bring back to Yemen to create the peace-driven economy and to protect the development gains that we had for 50 years instead of fighting the local organizations working on the ground. And we have seen that how local organizations on the ground working on development issues, they have been suffering to get their voices out and be supported. As soon as COVID-19 flagged in the world, High Group made an initiative of a multi-international fund. The fund with international management and transparency measures was announced to address the needs to combat COVID-19 in Yemen with ventilators, testing kits, provision masks, etc. They stretched their network and procurement capacity and managed to secure these equipments to Yemen despite the strong competition and needs out there by the international, by the world. People are fighting for these equipments. COVID-19 threats further the country re-and-struggle economy, social economy, and deepen further the humanitarian crisis, transferring more people into famine. As one said, and I'm echoing here my colleagues, Yemenis fear hunger more than COVID-19, and this is the reality. While Houthis rebels crashed the civil society space and demolished the private sector and narrowed the circle of businessmen influencers and substituted it with their own group's members, Houthis shred further the inequality between Yemenis and human rights values and democracies, and brought in Yemen back to 1,000 years of supremacy. It deepened the gender inequality where Houthis dare to even sexually harass and detain and torture women. This is the first time happening in the history of the country for thousands of years. As we know, COVID-19 proved how essential it is to the trust between the government and its citizens, or the state, or whoever is controlling the place. However, in Yemen, COVID-19 made Houthis crash human rights values and transparency further, threatening patients, doctors to deaths. And as we are hearing further, they are even closing charity NGOs in the country. We see armed groups also becoming, as my colleagues said, more active to gain political and geographical gains. Houthis became more oppressive over the people under their control areas, using COVID-19 as a motive. And what we might happen to big extents is that the armed groups, especially Houthis, will exploit further COVID-19 conference and pledging conference to gain financial and economic power. And this is what we are afraid of. The conflict has made Yemen lose its precious development gains and put us decades back. COVID-19 is an opportunity to stand together, to unite us together firmly and seriously. Otherwise, it will hit us all back, giving our country's sensitive geographical position. And Yemen might be deleted from the map with COVID-19 as well. Yemen is operating via a war economy driven, and what is needed is to flip to peace-driven economy, focusing on strengthening the state, the fragile state, yes. The governance, stronger strategic partnerships, stronger measurements for humanitarian aid operations and funds allocations, inclusion of grassroots leaders and influencers and community members as monitors and players. We must fight all together on a multi-level solutions. Let us at least have extreme, this is an extreme circumstances which needs a firm and extreme solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bushra, for that. Thanks to all four speakers for your time and for incredibly interesting yet damning analysis of the situation in Yemen at the moment, and then the actors taking place in the conflict. Before we go on to open the floor to our viewers, I had a few questions that I wanted to run by you. And I wanted to go back to what Fatima was saying at the beginning of the panel regarding the successes and the failings of this UN peace process. And I wondered, could COVID in some way bring about some form of a silver lining in that it could push for the peace process that so far has been, as you said, unrealistic? Could it push it to become a more realistic, a more successful peace process as the situation deteriorates further?
I feel like it would be a gambit to put some type of hopes on COVID and link it with the peace process. We're assuming that the actors are rational, and they're extremely irrational. To do something about COVID, return people home. That's a start. You know, open up, push back all of the people that you've displaced, put them back home, and withdraw from the territories that you took by force. You know, I think that one of the reasons why, you know, COVID is spreading in Sana'a silently under Houthi areas is because the Houthis want to maintain some illusion of control, that they have everything under control. And this is the lie that they've been spreading to people. So it will ultimately challenge their legitimacy in Sana'a, where they have been, you know, for better or worse, if you like them or not, they've been effectively controlling Sana'a. So when people are starting to see videos of their other residents and neighbors and people that they know that they're being buried at night, you know, droves of people dying, the death toll is increasing, funerals are increasing, and a lot of rumors are also spreading in Sana'a because people are alert. Now, this is something that the Houthis cannot stop. You know, the spread of COVID-19, they can't stop. And this is one of the things that's also very difficult to blame the coalition for, because it's a global pandemic. So in the past, when cholera happened and an outbreak of cholera took place, they sat back and they said, this is not our fault, it's the coalition, give us funding and we will deal with this. But with COVID-19, I think, you know, it's a totally different ballgame, because they want to say, we're better than any other countries in managing this. If this comes to our territory, we will find a way to defeat it. We will find a way to control it. So they're still maintaining this illusion of control. The other thing is that I think that the Houthis care about stopping the spread of this disease among their fighters rather than you know, the local populations and residents, and we've seen evidence of that. One mind-boggling thing for me is that there is, you know, while all of Yemen is suffering from a lack of capacity, equipment, and lab equipment, we see a lab facility being built right now in Sada, where it's basically the Houthi homeland, and it's sort of like the machine for the fighters in the country. And also a lot of the Houthi leadership reside there, allegedly also Abd al-Malik al-Houthi, the leader of the militia. So we need to, you know, again, the UN agencies need to maintain their neutrality and be impartial, and in helping build these labs, make sure that there is access for all. So I just don't think that at the time being, there is willingness to stop and say, you know, there's a national pandemic that could take over. What is we're still at the stage of the politics of it all. And I think that the Houthis are probably going to handle the crisis the same way that Iran had handled the crisis, which is total blackout, you know, for weeks on end, until it became bigger than themselves, and then they had to ask for help. And I think it's once it starts hitting their leadership, that's when they realize that this is going to be a problem, and that's when they're gonna maybe launch international appeals for aid. Of course, always prompted by the fact that this was this has come from the coalition. You know, it's nothing that they contracted themselves. Even the first few cases that they've announced, they've carefully waited for a Somali national and someone who has come from Aden, which is an area that they don't control, for them to say, hey, you know, this is something that we have control over, but it's coming from outside.
Thank you, Fatima. And you mentioned the potential for them using a blackout. So that makes me wonder, and I'd like to ask Laura about this as the journalist among us, is in terms of media coverage of Yemen, obviously it's been minimal for most of the last 5 years of the war, and it's been very difficult for the media, for journalists to actually access these areas. And I wondered, do you think that the arrival of COVID-19, particularly if it becomes a major problem within Yemen, will this decrease even further the ability to cover this conflict, and how will that affect the conflict itself?
Well, this is basically in the hand of the Yemeni government, which is actually in a very difficult spot, as we know, completely contained in a compound in Aden with no power, and inside the country, and with very less credibility inside the country and even outside. And somehow, if Yemen and, if we want to put Yemen again in the spotlight, first of all, visa should be issued for journalists, official visas, because one of the things we saw in the last 2 years, and except for people with double nationalities, so people could be able to get in and out, it's the fact that at the end, we were forced to have only two choices. One choice is to go embedded with the Saudis, which is, of course, is a kind of very limited coverage, going to an area absolutely we know war, like Marib, and most of the colleagues that never put a finger in Yemen, they went to Marib, so they give a special, we can say, perspective about the war. But on the other side, well, I can say my personal opinion is worse. When you are smuggled on the border with Oman, and you have to pay $7,500 per person, which is actually what they're asking to us, to be smuggled from this border and go directly into the hand of Houthis. They will be controlling you in Sana'a. Everything you do, you will stay in a hotel, you will be controlled 24 hours. You can't do basically what the coverage that you want to do, and they will show you only hospitals, and only certain hospitals, and only certain people. Well, basically you're giving your money to militias, and with more, of course, of $7,500, you're fueling them. So what's the deal here? As a journalist, I asked to myself, is it right? Well, I don't think so, honestly. So the last solution we have is to ask to our colleagues on the ground to help us. But as we know, for them, it's very, very dangerous. So if Yemen, all Yemen, wants to be again in the spotlight, first the Yemeni government should release official visas. That's my, my first concern is this one. Of course, this is difficult because to reach Yemen, we have to pass by Jordan or Egypt or Sudan. So we know that the borders are closed in most of these countries. So basically, also from there, it will be difficult to arrive into Yemen, except if we follow the routes of UN through the Corn of Africa and through Djibouti, which is something very exceptional. Second, what I just want to underline, and also going to follow the suggestion of the other panelists, is the fact that we should give more space to the Yemeni civil society. We just talk about militias, groups who have the control of their territories. We talk a lot about civil society during the time of the revolution. We spoke a lot about them during the time of the Conference on National Unity, but it seems that all the civil society disappeared. Of course, most of these people are abroad, and this is a problem, but there are still so many Yemenis who are fighting for the good in their very little spots. We know that there are teachers who are building schools. We know that there are young people who are still organizing exhibitions of paintings. They're still struggling. They open radio stations. They're doing their best to let this society not be killed by militias, by this fear, by all this sufferance going from generation to generation. I know it's difficult, but I think as journalists, with the help of our colleagues on the ground, we should find these stories and spread these stories for the good and the future of this country, and to keep the hopes up.
Thank you, Laura. And absolutely agree as a fellow journalist that's incredibly important. I think journalists and media tend to get lost in the violence of the conflict and forget to look for the more human stories that I think are as important in the midst of war. Let me briefly ask Najwa, before we open the floor to our viewers, I was wondering if you could give us an outline of, you mentioned also, we talked about Socotra briefly, the island, and I was wondering whether you think that in a near future this could become the next sort of big hotspot between the differing Saudi UAE approach.
Yeah, sadly optimistic about Socotra. I mean, this is an island that was extremely peaceful. It had no conflict, no crime, not even poisonous animals, not even dogs, until the Emiratis decided to militarize it. And then the government wanted to regain control of Socotra, and then the island became a hotspot for the conflict between the Emiratis, the STC on the one side, and the Yemeni government on the other side. I think the Saudis are still largely trying to mediate the situation and find a solution, but I don't think they're competent enough to do that, or they still haven't made a decision how to deal with the island. So sadly, yes, and it's very sad because it's such a beautiful place and with a very fragile environment. And my worry is that all this military activity in Socotra and the conflict is going to destroy the island. Almost 8,000 of the species of the island cannot be found anywhere else in the world. So yeah, I'm not very optimistic.
All right, thank you, Najwa. So let me open now the floor to our viewers. We've already received quite a few questions. And the first one I would like to direct to Bushra, and it's from Alexander Jalil. So Alexander asks, what are the possibilities that Mohammed bin Zayed succeeds in lobbying Mohammed bin Salman to abandon Hadi and support the STC? And he goes on, in that case, could we see a Saudi Houthi deal where the Houthis get a North Yemen state, peace with its neighbors and reconstruction funds from Saudi in exchange for cutting ties with Iran? That's a very complex and
question is directed to me.
yes, please. If you'd like to answer that, that would be great. Thank you.
That's a very complicated answer. I'm not a very political, and I'm not into the political analysis arena. However, I would might have the support from my colleagues here, but I could reframe the question. What if Mohammed bin Zayed and Mohammed bin Salman changed their approach to Yemen and start building a strategic development approach where there's like a relationship that's based on stabilizing and peace building, stabilizing the country, bringing back the economy and bringing in strategic businesses and whatever, it's okay, but not, and keeping this the sovereignty of the country and the unification of the country. Other than this, I have no clue what could be done, because there is no answer for this question. What if Hadi vanish? He's already,
it's a complex.
He's already like, yeah, he's already not in the scene, but yeah, it's a very complex question.
Yeah, it's also quite hypothetical. But by the way, if anyone wants to jump in at any point and chip in to the answers, please feel free to do that as well. I'd like to go on to the next question sent in by Hamdan Al-Hamdani, and it's directed to Fatima. Hamdan says, you mentioned that the failure of Yemen's peace process is due to its economic complexity. Can you give us points and examples of these economic complexities?
Just really basic bread and butter issues. People are starving, and you see now just a massive failure in the health sector. The lack of service provision, and then the unequal service provision is another factor. So you have the income inequalities. These also contribute to a sense of disparity and economic challenges. And you know, there are ways that this should be dealt with. So for a while, for example, we kept hearing about the salaries not being dispersed, and that's a real problem. So I was just told 2 days ago from somebody who lives in Aden that the STC, which is the group, the secessionist group that announced self-administration in the south of Yemen, had put a new administrator to the Jamhuriya hospital in their area, and that this administrator, within his first day, dispersed salaries for people and their bonuses that have been held up for 4 months. All of this, you know, I mean, and the person who told me was not even a pro-STC person. He was not a loyalist for this group. But this is how groups gain legitimacy, is when you do not, as an entity that is internationally recognized, do not do the basics to instill some confidence in people. When the floods happened, for example, in the south of Yemen in particular, that was an opportunity for the secessionist group, the Southern Transitional Council, to say, the government has had the opportunity to fix things for 6 years. It has not fixed anything. And we would like to take that opportunity to fix it. I doubt that they can. But if they manage to do the fixes that they're promising to do, it will be a complete challenge to the government legitimacy. It'd be one of the problems that will continue fueling conflict. So the absence of the government is also another issue that had played in with the economic situation in the country. But you know, the absence of electricity. Again, if I go back to 2013, this was during the national dialogue. In Sana'a, there was power cuts every day while people are talking about a better future for Yemenis. I mean, the very little food that you've had is being spoiled in the fridge. So, you know, at the end, it's bread and butter issues that we keep getting back over and over. And this challenges the legitimacy of the government, of that is supposed to provide services. So what is needed is to have that type of thinking in the peace process. What's needed is for, you know, just some type of an international concerted effort with the Yemeni government to prioritize the delivery and the delivery of critical economic services to the people. And because that's a core conflict issues that we keep forgetting. It's not just the guns on the ground and the people fighting on the ground. So you have people's frustrations due to their current situation that are fueling conflict constantly. Security is another component that also affects the economic situation. You know, if you can't go from point A to point B to get your food or go to school or what have you, because you're concerned about either a terrorist attack or you're concerned about, you know, just obstacles that you can find in the way due to the conflict, then the situation will never really pick up. You know, there wouldn't be the necessary investment in Yemen to prosper. So people are really given crumbs. They're not seeing any hope for their future. And I think that, you know, we really have to start putting back the focus on the emphasis on the Yemeni citizen, who is completely disadvantaged throughout this entire process.
All right, Fatima, thank you very much for that. There's another question from Hamdan. This one is directed to Najwa, and he asks, you stated that the only way that the Houthis will submit to peaceful negotiations is by weakening the Houthis militarily. Can you explain how and why is the Houthis such a power, and that they've been able to prevent being militarily weakened by all of their opponents?
It's not that the Houthis are such a power, they're not. It's the fact that their opponents, local and regional opponents, are busy fighting each other and undermining each other. The government is fighting the STC in the south. The ones who are fighting the Houthis in Marib, Baida, Jove are mainly tribes, and they haven't been receiving enough support by the Saudi-led coalition to push the Houthis far enough. Over the past 5 years, it's been pretty much, these front lines have been kept pretty much in a stalemate situation, like a war of attrition. These forces were not given enough. Some of these fighters are in the front lines fighting for like 6 months without any salaries. Sometimes they run out of ammo while they're fighting the Houthis and then end up, you know, being pushed back. I think it goes back to the main problem, which is that the Saudis and the Yemeni government do not have a solid, strategic, military, consistent military plan to push the Houthis far enough. Like I said, in March, Houthi forces were collapsing east of Marib. All of a sudden, the Saudis announced ceasefire, and that stopped. In the West Coast, there is Tariq Saleh forces. Also, they don't recognize Hadi's government. and I won't get into why. But again, the Houthis are facing fractured forces that are busy undermining each other rather than, strategically fighting the Houthis, and a Saudi-led coalition that seems to have derailed from its stated objective, which is weakening the Houthis, to, splitting South Yemen, or basically the Saudis trying to contain the situation here and there in a reactionary way.
Thank you, Natra. Bushra, if you'd like to elaborate on the support from the international community to Yemen.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sophia. I just want to elaborate on this issue and discuss further the economic part. As you said, it's what's driving now the war is the war-driven economy, not a peace-driven economy, saying that truly that Yemenis suffer, and they could suffer for a long time from not having a bread, but they will not get into the war. What brought people into war is an external drive. It's the Yemenis will not fight over bread. Even if they fight, they will not fight for 5 years. This is a fact. And that we have seen that the fragile state that Yemen had after the national dialogue, the economic situation is not the main drive for this war. The main drive of this war is an external drive. Another aspect is that if we could build a peace-driven economy, and this is to the international community, how they could support Yemen. Peace-driven economy, adding the development nexus. We have seen that there are some programs working in Yemen with the farmers where they found that they have been employed, supporting farmers who employed 22,000 workers. Some of them were in the front lines. 40% of these workers were in the front lines and left the front lines. So building economies building the businesses and economies that could support food security, support ending this war, providing income for those people so that they are not being employed by the armed groups. This is essential to put it in our consideration and to discuss it among the international community. It's important also that the international community and the government put together, unify, solidarate, and collaborate properly in putting a strategic approach to Yemen. It's very important that this strategic approach, the funds allocation, it should be measured, it should be monitored. The local CSOs, the local organizations should be the main players to monitor these allocations of these funds. There must be a better collaboration with the government, where we saw that Hudaydah was the main reason, the humanitarian situation was the main reason for the ceasefire and the Stockholm Agreement. Today, Aden, nobody is talking about it, and we have COVID-19, floods, diseases, people are dying. Nobody is talking about it. Nobody says, okay, ceasefire, we have to do something. The international, it's completely in silence. And that's why we feel, Yemenis, that the international community are putting their own definition of the problem, their own solution in a different bubble, and the situation on the ground is different, completely different. They have to listen to us. They have to incorporate with Yemenis and listen to Yemenis. This is how it should be. And there should be some dignity. There should be a cash registry system. Provide some dignity to Yemeni people. Yes, they are starving. Yes, they need food. But they shouldn't be in every single donor's organization document as it's humiliating. It's humiliating the Yemenis. Yemenis are people who have heritage, legacy, history, and this is really humiliating. And if we question where did the money gone in the last 5 years, we couldn't question it. People have been questioning. There was many people asking that we couldn't figure out where did the money go until the panel of experts report came out, and we figured that at least 87% of the violations in 1 year were by the Houthis. So these should be well addressed, well measured. Criteria should be clearly should be transparent, and there should be accountability that's built upon, and a strategic approach with the government to support the financial and economic cycle, so that you don't create money laundering, you don't create combating terror, you don't create more armed groups. You don't know where the flood of the money is going, where the cycle of money is going. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bushra. We're nearing the end of the panel, but I wanted to get through a few more questions before that. And I wanted to direct this next one to Laura. It's by one of our viewers called Matteo Restivo. And he asks, would you like to explore a little more the role of women in Yemen in recent years? And what could be the consequences of COVID for women of their access to their system, or in terms of also violence and abuse towards women?
Yeah, sure. And just want to say something more about what Bushra just said. That also media have a very strong responsibilities in picturing Yemenis like very, very poor and very unarmed in front of what's happening. Also the communication, I'm very concerned about it, even though I understand the humanitarian sectors and the way of communicating the needs. But Yemenis, yes, it's true, are starving, but they have their own dignity, and this dignity should be pictured also, and media also, they should be concerned also in changing this narrative, because this narrative is not good for Yemenis themselves. About the role of women, well, we know that we are talking about a country where during the time of the conference on national unities, women struggle very much to be present and talk. They struggle very much to have new laws about many things, including early marriages and so on. Well, I can say from my perspective, according to all what I witnessed during the war many times, and all the stories I heard, all the people spoke about with, is the fact that on the other hand, like happened in all wars, women, because men are not around because they're fighting, they were and they are still able to do things that maybe before they couldn't do, like just to give an example, there's a woman in Hadid that's running a shop of electricity, and I met by myself in Sana'a a girl was doing her internship in the Nissan factory and working as engineer with cars. And there are many stories, but of course they are not enough compared to what's happening to the majority of the population. We have to think about in some governorates, like in the areas up to Sana'a, close to Sada, women, even before the war, they couldn't feed their children, or they were malnourished, so the children were still growing as malnourished children because they didn't feed themselves first. They feed the men before, the old people, the family, then they feed their husbands, and then the children, and then themselves, even though they were pregnant. And this is something that we know very well, but we don't say too much talking about malnutrition in Yemen. We can say that, and according to the data, but according also to some interviews I did, that unfortunately early marriages are growing, mostly because of necessity. I met a man close to Odeida. He said, well, I gave my daughter, she's 12 years old, because my wife, she has kidney failures, so I need to pay for her treatment, because in the public hospitals there's no anymore treatment for free. So I needed this $1,000 coming from the dowry, because I don't want that my wife will die. And my daughter agrees. So what to say in a situation like this one? We go back again to the economic situation and what is happening. As Bushra said before in her first speech, it's the first time we see in Yemen women tortured in prisons. We will never see before, and this is something very strong in the tribal culture in Yemen. Women, they should not be touched for any reason, and I can assure that it's like that. We even didn't have in the check in the checkpoints. They didn't. Nobody touches us. It's true. Men or women, they don't put their hands in our bags. They don't put their hands on our body, and this is something that doesn't happen in any other Arab country, honestly. So, and this is a challenge, and we can say from this perspective that for women it's better, but we can say only that for women it's worse. With COVID-19, well, women are will work more than before. In all these factories in Sana'a, all the employees are women. The head of the factory is very proud to say in front of a camera that he's giving a job to women. Well, women are profiting from this because they can have some income. But of course, they're struggling more because they put themselves in danger going to work in a very crowded factories where there are many other women just to tailor masks. And so they're proud to help others, but they put themselves at risk for very few income. And at the same time, of course, they will work the double because going back home, they will not stay on the couch. They will work more and more. And so the price that maybe women could pay will be being more at risk, even though we know that COVID-19 doesn't hit women more than men. And on the other hand, when we talk about medical facilities and we talk about hospitals, we know that are very few. There are, of course, hospitals for women, but there are very few compared to all the askari hospitals and all the hospitals for men and the military hospitals. So also for women who are pregnant, the condition will be more difficult. And what about, of course, people living in the countryside?
All right, Laura, thank you so much. We are going to have to wrap this up in a couple of minutes. Before we go, I think we are going to be briefly joined by Mitchell Belfer, who should be somewhere here. We give him a moment. But Laura, Bushra, Fatima, Najwa, thank you so much for your time. And thank you to all of the viewers who have sent in their questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them. There is so much to talk about, and it's been such an interesting, albeit quite disheartening and a little bit sad, but a very interesting panel nonetheless. And I just want to open the floor to Mitchell if he's.
I'm here. I don't know if you can hear me. So I'm the invisible partner. It says that I cannot start the video for some reason.
We can hear you though.
But if you hear me, that is fine.
Yes.
Okay, never mind. It is allowing me to start. Okay. See, I am a real person.
Welcome.
I didn't have the opportunity to listen to all of your presentations, but from what I've heard, I entered about half an hour ago, 40 minutes ago. The debate is excellent. It's so important because it's very typical that people just let Yemen fall off the radar. They're focusing more on economic issues, or they're focusing on, you know, the geopolitics that typically involves the great global powers. But I think that since Yemen is not in the eye, for example, of the United States, it's not in the crosshair of an American, EU, Russia, China kind of framework, it has a tendency not to be front and center, but it has such a wide impact on the region, and through Yemen, it unfolds so many different residual conflicts, so many residual, be it economic, be it social and political, humanitarian. that it's just simply a topic that cannot be ignored. And so it really fills me with such pride that we've been able to host such an amazing panel led by such an amazing moderator. I obviously don't have the intention of running us too far over time, but I did want to personally come on just for a few moments to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules, scattered all over the world as it is, the United States, in Jordan, here in Italy, Tunisia, and of course in Sweden, being able to come together today, you know, for very, very important speakers and wonderful moderators. So I just wanted to thank you on behalf of the organization for taking the time today. And we certainly hope that this is not the last time that we're going together, but women who have sharp intellect on this particular issue. So I thank you from our organization and from everybody else for joining us today. Thank you very much.
All right, Mitchell, thank you very much. And again, thank you so much to all of the speakers, to all of our viewers. And stay tuned on the EJIC Twitter handle, the website. Be sure to check out for more upcoming events. And everyone stay safe and have a very healthy and safe Ramadan. And hope to speak with all of you again very soon.